Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in February 2023. And now we're going to be talking about the incident response playbooks, which is, I think, definitely a topic that's been growing a lot more and more, because I think we're trying to make sure that a lot of the stuff that we do in security is actually captured, is repeatable, and we kind of scales. On the whole world, it maps nicely well. This is about productizing, commoditizing, right? Moving to the right, some of the things that sometimes are manually done. So I'm Dinis, I helped run the summit. I'm the CISO Holman Barrett. I'm chief scientist of Glasswall. I'm involved in all sorts of stuff, right? And security has been definitely a big passion of me. Eliza, if you can give us a quick intro to you and how this playbook fits into your world.
Yes, okay. So I'm Eliza-May Austin, and I'm the CEO of that security company with a subsidiary brand called Pocket Scene, but I won't bore you with any of that stuff. So my perspective on playbooks is very much how we can reliably help defense, whether that's an internal team, an external team, or a combination, to understand what they need to do in a crisis. Not everyone handles crisis well, and I think that we need, and what tends to work in especially larger organizations, is having very granular playbooks that involve the technology, literally things like click on this, investigate that, if there's something weird happening with that account, check it in AD, check it in this, blah blah, all the way from that very granular small level, which is very important, all the way to senior directors and how they handle an incident, whether or not they pay a ransom, all of those things agreed preemptively, so that when an attack happens, they're not just flailing in the wind. So my perspective on playbooks is very much that, and I do think automation has got a part to play in there, especially when it comes to SOCs and on that very technical level, and using different technologies and people that are at different levels, using ticketing systems, all that kind of stuff. But I do think there's a lot to be said for the traditional sense of playbooks, in terms of, right, okay, this shit's happened, what do I do now? I need to read that thing. Okay, I read that thing, that tells me to do this. That tells me I need to contact ICO and the police or whatever. So my perspective on playbooks is quite broad, actually.
Cool. Venkat?
Yeah, I'm Venkat, and I'm the founder of Flexible AR. Mainly the focus is to develop playbooks for incident response, and also to conduct drills over these playbooks that are built. Definitely, Eliza, I agree with you, the overall thought of playbooks, right? One of the things I want to add about playbooks again is the naming convention of playbooks, right? I mean, you start with standard operating procedures, then people call it runbooks, again playbooks, again automation related playbooks, tactical level playbooks, strategy level playbooks. I guess the entire naming convention of a playbook is all of them primarily are step-by-step instructions to execute something, right? Maybe a problem, and I need to have clear step-by-step instructions. Could be in the form of a text, or it could be a video format, or audio format, but clear step-by-step instructions.
Actually, by the way, Nick, I think it's a great sign of maturity of an industry when you start to have companies that try to provide that service. It's a bit like threat modeling went from being there's 5 dudes on there who do it, then there's a couple group, then there's a little group here, to actually having companies who actually try to come up with threat modeling. Same thing with playbooks, started by these very esoteric groups and people that are automating, and now there's companies that are trying to scale it, bring it in, they soar. I think it's a good sign of maturity that something special is happening here.
I don't want to jump in before Nick has got a chance to introduce himself. I'm sorry, but I do want to say that the flip side of that is, as soon as something becomes a topic of discussion at the engineering level, it can quickly become a buzzword and companies can jump on it and try and sell products to it.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Nick, lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, did we have a session on Zero Trust? That's probably the prime example where people jumped on that. I'll study Zero Trust, whatever that is. Anyway, yeah, hi.
What the F is Zero Trust?
Yeah. Deputy CISO, Head of Cybersecurity here at Holland & Barrett. Fairly new to work very closely with Dinis. So within my remit, I've got quite a broad remit, but then quite a deep one, and that involves the SOC and the incident response team. So we are writing playbooks at the moment. We're updating them against real life events. I've written them in the past. I've been in them. And even sort of starting from early days in the military, everything, because you had to standardize it. Everyone had to follow the same set of rules, the same playbook. There were playbooks for everything. There were procedures, SOPs for everything. And that's what you ran through. In terms of sort of how I see it fitting with the organization, it has to be, in my perspective, it has to be governed by the business continuity plan. Cyber response and resilience is one of many resiliences: fire, flood, supply chain, fallovers. So we've got to fit to that. And then largely in sort of the way I've run it before is a cyber incident response plan sets the framework for all the other playbooks, which is kind of appendices to that. The balance I found is, and it usually, as you come down the stack, gets more granular. As you go down, you're very much in what Eliza-May explains. This analyst needs to go to this platform to look at this thing, run this query, and then move on. But actually, the further up you go, it kind of, as long as you've got all the preparation in place, it's a bit more of a checklist, so that, because a lot of situations can vary, so you need to have the handrails rather than the dedicated procedures. So at least the people in the board who's ever in charge of making the ransomware call, deciding what to say to the press, how to handle the customers, they've got some templates to hand and they've got the handrails, but need to adapt their checklist to fit the situation and scenario.
Yeah. And then can we start with a bit of a controversial topic, right? Because I find that, I think in security in general, right? But I'll probably say in incident response, and this is, every single team I've seen, right? I think we do a very bad job at capturing what we do, right? I think people go on freaking tangents, they investigate things, right? And my background here is that when I used to do pen testing, I used to basically, the name of the game was to freaking own the system, right? Like, the bigger the exploit, the bigger the freaking rock and rolls. Like there's definitely a moment where you go, I'm going to freaking own the hell out of the system, right? And then eventually you compromise the application, and then eventually you hit the data center, and then eventually you get to the point you go, holy shit, I should not be here, right? Because, but there's a moment where, the name of the game is like, and I started to realize I felt like there's a bit of a theater going on here, because all I'm doing is I'm finding enough shit so I can have a nice beef up report to justify my cost, so that they don't ask me the really important question is, what do I need to do to make this secure? It's almost like they go, yeah, I just give you 6 months of work, go and fix that stuff, because by the way, this is freaking serious, right? But the more I would say evolve on security, and the more I became better, and also the more I became given hard applications to test, right? Now, the kind of app that comes with a manual how this got secured, right? Which you kind of know that it's going to be really well secured. But the more I realized that I needed to be very thorough on my analysis, right? Because also, like, I realized that I needed to basically almost go slow to go fast. Instead of going on tangents and trying to find all these little things and come out in the end going, ta-da, look, I did it, right? It's almost like, no, let me capture the steps I took. Let me capture even the tangents that I've gone that didn't show anything, right? Because sometimes not only I would go back to my steps and go, ooh, that was interesting, let me follow that rabbit hole. I also found that showing what I did that didn't produce any result is sometimes as important that showing, what actually caused results. So in a way, Eliza, going back to your SOC world, its response world, I'm as interested in knowing what, for example, you guys would be doing, right? And what checks you've done, what checkbox you saw, then I haven't seen anything. Or I've seen X. I'm going, yeah, but is that all you saw, or you just happened to get lucky? Or did you actually had all these playbooks that you executed?
Did you have a process? Yeah.
And a lot of them result in nothing. Great, right? Cool. I'm actually more interested in about maybe that part of the answer than the other one. And I feel we're still a bit of an industry where when you ask what you're doing, how you done it, how you discover it, you get good findings, but the process is almost like the needs for the playbooks are not there. Am I being too harsh here?
No, I think you're right, but I think there's a reason for that. So in a a DFIR situation where there's an active incident going on right now, it's kind of not a priority.
Sorry, what was that?
Digital forensics and incident response. So it's kind of not a major priority in that moment. If you want answers now, give me answers now. The other flip side of that is, say if you're a consultancy company coming in, particularly because a company has been the victim of ransomware, right? Now you can apply all of your standardizations in the world that you've got, but they won't match that company, I guarantee. So it goes back to the relevancy that we were talking about this afternoon, where if I am applying a manufacturing mindset to a military situation or a medical situation or a shop, totally different. And I will end up having members of staff going through the motions, checking things off, wasting time that A, don't make sense for that environment, and B, just don't align to their business goals. So if it's a manufacturing company, let's say that everything goes down with ransomware and they're like, oh shit, what do we do? Rather than go, right, we need to look at the press and work out how we're going to save our reputation, they're manufacturing buttons. No one gives a shit. You could have them in the news every day. No one's going to listen to it. They're going to flick the channels. So that that's not a priority, right? In terms of finances, the finances is dependent on the machines being operational. So it's all of these things that would apply massively and be like 100% critical, all hands on deck. We need to aim everything at XYZ in one company means completely the opposite in another. So when you go into a company from an incident response perspective, you are looking particularly at how do we get these machines back online? And that might be that we, for the moment, sacrifice the website, we sacrifice the ordering system, we sacrifice payroll, we concentrate on that, we make up for the rest later. So any playbook is not going to be something you can bring in. It has to be something that's built internally, and you can't always do that without the skills. And in order to have those skills, you have to have a thirst for it. And I can guarantee right now that, manufacturing, aerospace, trains, loads of different companies don't give a shit about that stuff until it happens. Then they allocate budget to it. That budget gets spent. The mature rate goes up a little bit. They've spent too much. They sack everyone else, outsource everything. It happens again. Oh my God.
But what you just described is a playbook, right? So even what you drop or you don't drop, that in itself,
absolutely 100%
top level guidance of what you do, right?
That's definitely a playbook. And like Nick was saying, you need that sort of strategic level playbook for sure. But that can be something that, you can have your CFO, CEO, and whoever the CF, whatever else can sit there and go, right, we'll make sure we've got a retainer with that company. We'll make sure we've got a PR retainer with that company, blah, 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 blah. And they can action them when they need to. But whether or not they have an appetite to do that is the thing that we're up against in the industry of sort of incident response.
It also helps focus and keep people on what they've agreed as well. So you talk about taking the business approach. Which are the departments which you're going to bring up last? Which are the priorities with your crown jewels and those that keep the business operational, stop you failing, stop the business disappearing forever? And having a playbook means, you can walk that board sort of through it, but it means when it comes to the 11th hour, you haven't got department over here going, but I'm more important, save me. Because you go, no, we've gone through this, we've decided you're bottom of the pile, we'll come to you later, we've got bigger things to worry about. And it really just helps stop you going down rabbit holes when I know there's a point where you're saying, Dinis, you have to go investigate a rabbit hole, but this is a different type of rabbit hole. It stops you going down that and you can focus on the incident at hand.
Because you become more efficient, right?
Yeah.
But even to the point of, on that granular level, I've worked on incidents where you've got third parties that come in, they're providing forensics, and they're running like information gathering exercises on encrypted boxes because that's on their checklist to do, despite the fact it adds absolutely no value and it can take a few hours to do it.
So you actually talk about the case when the playbooks are actually wrong. So you talk about the case where people already have a set of actions that they follow through.
But in that incident, you're hiring a professional to come in with their playbooks and they are going to image encrypted boxes that add absolutely no value to your situation whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting conversation.
Yeah, that is also the thing is, see, I view playbooks as please note that the next attack we don't know, right? It's going to be an unknown attack. And as you said, the investigation paths could vary, right? I mean, some of the paths could lead towards a result, some of them may not. But what I observe here is, see, every investigation path would have its set of analysis, right? The steps to analyze. So those steps need to be captured. I guess the moment you have a library of your steps to analyze, the steps to mitigate, your counteractive measures, that itself is a big repository. And when something unknown happens, you need to have the ability to create playbooks on the fly and respond to it. So the playbooks would never be constant.
See, that exactly right. And that was going to be my next point, which is two things, right? I think the best time to build a playbook is doing an incident, right? Which is why I always push my teams to put a lot more resources. And I always, I guess, I strategically choose to prioritize incidents over other projects. So if you look at the way incidents the team operates, is instead of having 2-3 people, you have 5 or you have 10. Because I kind of take the view that the best time to develop playbooks is actually doing the incident. And going to your point, Eliza, of having our playbooks are not very good, also the best time to make sure that the playbooks you developed last time actually are any good is doing an incident. So that means that basically a well-run incident, like, oh my, what is the definition of the evolution of this? Is that you have an incident, there's no playbooks, right? So then you scramble and you're going to make a lot of mistakes because you're not going to get the order right. Ideally, through it, you create playbooks. The next time you have the same incident, you start with the previous playbook, right? And then you go, well, that was not relevant, or that was not relevant, or freaking hell, why are we doing this? Like your example, like get rid of that, and then you zoom in. And what should be happening is that you are moving up in a way, almost or down, depends how you want to see it, right? The skill required to execute the playbook. So you're commoditizing to the point where suddenly half of it can be run by the IT team, half of it can be run by the support team, half of it can be run by the first responders, and then you're only dealing with the corner cases. And in a way, the natural evolution of this is that you don't handle that incident, and that incident just becomes an event. Because what you have done was to say, within these parameters and those parameters, we don't care anymore, right? That's within our risk appetite. As long as you can handle within this window, as long as you do this, as long as this is happening, that stops being a security incident to being just an event, right? Something that is handled outside. So, but I think the key here is to make sure that the people involved in the incident have enough time, resources, and mandate to improve the playbooks during the incident. And that doesn't usually happen.
I think you can do it retrospectively, though.
It's hard. It's hard. Of course, you can do it, and I think a lot of people do it. But I think you lose a lot of context, and also what you do is you lose a lot of little sequence of events that are important to see, like what questions you ask, we shouldn't. And by then, people are even more interested in moving on, right? Like if you don't have time during an incident, come on, how many people really do good postmortems, right? And post-incident analysis.
But if you were leading an incident, right, and then you were like, okay, why don't I have this in front of me right now? And someone was like, well, actually, I'm typing up my notes. You'd think, oh my God, I want to rip your head off. I mean, I would.
Well, but there's a balance there, right? No, but there's a balance there, because the problem here is that as the incidents get bigger, actually probably tidying up your notes might be one of the most important things somebody needs to be doing, because you need to make sure that you follow the rabbit holes. Also, you need to make sure you can delegate effectively. So yeah, if you have 2 people running an incident, they can get away with a lot of informality. If you have 3, 5, 10, 20, 30, 50, or 100, which can easily happen on a bigger incident, right? As you go and all the teams involved, actually incident management, who's doing what, when, what's going on, task management, that becomes one of the most important tasks, to be done here, right? And the system to manage that has to scale, right?
Do you think, I mean, I'm just posing a question here to the panel. Do you think that there's, in some ways, maybe internally at some companies, an incentive to not have detailed playbooks for the sole reason that it tends to be the IT team, the network engineering team, the developers, whoever else, that actually does the dirty work when it comes to an incident? And that becomes very highlighted. I can see Venkat nodding, like, yes, all these changes need to be made and we need to get our backups restored and blah, blah. And that's like the technical engineering team that's doing it and not the cybersecurity team.
Yeah. And I said, just to add to this, I've seen several cases where, see, we give fairly detailed playbooks to clients, right? We tell them you follow all these steps. Right? We have seen the other way around, where the more detailed the steps are, it's again an overhead, right? I mean, some of them don't lead to results, some of them may not be correct. So it could again not meet the SLAs, right? The time to respond to an incident. So again, it could again cross across teams. So definitely there will be aggressions. There will be not acceptance of so many steps that get into a playbook.
I think just going back to your question, Eliza, I think you're very spot on, right? There's lots of politics involved, right? I also think that most organizations, most teams don't view incidents strategically. So what happens is that they tend to view an incident as almost an outlier. And then the point is to find the root cause, solve the root cause, and get rid of the incident, right? And what you don't look at is why that happened. It's like, it's almost like we blame an engineer that did this, or we blame a vulnerability here. But why did the vulnerability occur in the first place? Why did that engineer was in the first place in the place to do that? It's almost like there's lots of why was the environment created to cause what caused the problem in the first place? And those are A, uncomfortable things to look at. B, you need to actually approach the incident with the mindset of actually investigating it properly, because that's what you need to change. And a lot of the times, the problem is lack of documentation, right? The problem is lack of processes. The problem is, hey, these guys develop and they ship it, right? And they maintain it, but that's all nice and good, but that's starting to cause problems, right? Down the line, or this team doesn't know what that team is doing, and that team doesn't know what that team is doing, and that's what caused the problem. And documenting that becomes much more tricky, because you need to now have these teams also taking ownership of those things, and you need the time to understand the root causes.
Yeah, and I think it largely depends on where you are in your playbook. When the balloon's gone up, and you're still in, until you've contained everything, that's kind of where the effort is going. But you can't fully eradicate the problem unless you've uncovered what the point of entry was, what the exfiltration was against the vulnerability, exploit against the vulnerability, and what was exfiltrated, and the whole kind of journey through. Because there's a chance that if they're still on the system, or they've still left a bit of malware behind, the device you contained sitting in the corner actually is going to cause you problems. So, but at the point you contain the issue, the sort of the intensity has dropped a bit, and you can start delving into all those root cause analysis and uncover the bits and pieces. I've actually got to dive off in a couple of seconds. So
but look, of course, that when the house is really on fire, I think let's go to your point, right? Like, if the whole freaking thing is on fire, yes, there's a point where you have to contain it, right? But I kind of find that usually you get that very quickly, especially if the attack is reasonably obvious, if it's something that you've seen, there's a side effect, usually, and you bring whatever needs from the business, right? And the business will react, right? Like, but it doesn't matter what dev team, like when there's a live thing, people will take very seriously. I think the challenge I have is it very quickly drops off, right? It very quickly drops off when they go, oh, there's a bug here, or there's a problem here, or we just need to patch this, or we need to block that thing there, and suddenly you drop off, but you're not now creating an environment where you're going to learn so much more, or understanding why did you miss all the signals in the first place, and then everybody loses energy because they're going to the next one. Because what they haven't done was they haven't cleared their schedule. They haven't taken, I'm going to take the time to actually handle these incidents more strategically, for example, to create the playbooks, to make sure that, Liam had a great question. By the way, Liam, I made you a co-host so you can join in. But Liam asks, if there's a starting point, isn't there a starting point before the playbook, right? So if every company had a business impact assessment before, that will inform what happens, right? When shit hits the fan, right? And of course, right, that would be awesome, right? It'd be awesome to have already that impact done before you done the incident. My experience is that usually you only do that after several incidents.
Yeah.
Right.
I also think we're talking about different incidents. Like, I would class things that you're talking about, that I'm sort of gauging what you're talking about, as being incidents, but like minor incidents that can be managed by the security team. Whereas I would consider like a major incident being full lockdown, having to get people from all aspects of the business, having to engage with PR and all that kind of shizzle.
But usually the
Can't believe I
business
said shizzle.
doesn't handle those very well, right? Because they don't have enough practice, right?
No, there is things you can do. I mean, there's like purple teaming, stuff like that that you can do, tabletop exercise, or
I know, but you practice, right? Like, like everything, right? Like so the reason I like to do these on those smaller ones, because when you get a bigger one, you prepare, right? There's so many little things that you develop that you just need the muscle memory. And yeah, you're right. In those major incidents, you don't have the time to figure some of these things out, right? Because you just need to go. So if you don't have a culture to communicate over Slack or another message, that's not where you're going to learn probably during the big, major incident that's on fire, right? But that you need to be preparing. It's like, training for the big day, right? So, you need that. And I actually think that we can give a lot of value to the business, because I think the way sometimes we handle incidents, the way the business can learn a lot from it. And so I think before you leave, any final notes from you on this one?
Final, where do I finish? I think that you talked about exercising, and I think that let's just sort of maybe leave that with a closing remark around the exercising, because there is a huge amount of value from some driving from the incident itself. People are focused and people are there, you got them in the room. Sometimes it's, if you can't create the incident, then the exercising is a really good way to go. The challenge is how far do you take the exercise, and how you split off or involve, say, the board all the way through down to sort of the guys pulling out the cables at the back of the server rack. So I think it's a good conversation to sort of just throw out as I dive away, is how you exercise the playbooks through that tiering, and try and get people more involved than going, oh, but it's just an exercise, so it's just all theoretical anyway. Because you can get really good value if you run it really well. And then I'll leave you with that, really.
So I like to do exercise on top of real incidents that you then go, well, they did this, but they turned left, right? What happens if you have done that? Or AWS is a good example. Hey, they compromised AWS. They just didn't realize the amount of crown rules that were there. Imagine if when they did that, instead of mining some Bitcoin, right? Or imagine if dumping some S3 buckets, they actually did this. And by then, there isn't a big jump, right? Because they had the key. They had this.
Yes, but by then, Dinis, nobody gives a shit, because yes, you could have gone left and you went right, and then you come along all enthusiastic and go, but if we'd have gone left, this would have happened, we'd have ruined our reputation, we'd have lost all this money, and everyone's going, yeah, but we didn't.
No, I'm just saying that as a tabletop exercise.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, and you're right. But what we're up against is that nobody gives a shit. That's my point. Like we're not going to get anywhere unless we look at the fact that the accounts team care about accounts, marketing cares about marketing, the CEO also cares about accounts. So unless we acknowledge that and we use that to our advantage in these incidents, in these fake incidents, then we're not going to get anywhere. We're just not going to penetrate. So like with something like purple teaming, having the security team aware of what's happening, having a total open book, base it on their most applicable threats, their most applicable adversaries, then using that live incident that the actual important people that are involved in the incident know it's fake, then go to PR and go, what the fuck do we do in this situation? Right? PR shit themselves. You know they've shot themselves. You write it down and you come back later on retrospectively and say, when we came to you and said we'd been hit by ransomware, or we found a database on the dark web, you shat your pants. Sorry, I keep swearing. I don't know how I do it. It's because I'm from Doncaster and we swear a lot. You got really scared by that because you didn't have a reaction. So we need to work out a reaction. And then that's how that is the way that I do it. And you're not the most liked person in the room, but do you care? No.
Yeah, but what you're doing is you're having
anyway. It's a really shame to leave you, but have a good evening. I'll speak soon. Bye.
Yeah, but that's what you're doing is you're using context, right? You're using a live incident to understand, hey, what will you do here? And you can also go, okay, if again, doing that live incident, you can ask the question, look, if they turn right or turn left, because by then it's realistic, right? In fact, it's called being prepared, right? Like you said, you want to almost give people a couple of days to think about something before it can happen. And there's actually instances where that will happen. Because again, you don't go nuclear straight away. You go, well, they're here, but they could do this, and then they could do that. So you start to think about, you get those individuals in the business to start to think, right, what we're going to do if this escalates. If it doesn't, great. But what are you going to do about it if he escalates? Venkat, what do you think?
I'm interested to know what Venkat says.
Yeah. So, okay. Tim, is it okay if I just show one playbook, which is for a ransomware attack?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, something interesting around this space, right? Which I'm always fascinated to showcase. So I'll walk through one playbook. My apologies. Okay. Control minus.
Cool.
Is my screen visible, please?
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm not able to zoom it in. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, it's quite big. You might want to zoom out a little bit.
It looks
Yeah.
it looks good. It's really easy
looks
to
good.
see.
Okay. It when you zoom it in, it becomes a lot better. But the thought process here is a holistic approach for a ransomware attack, right? How do we respond to it? So what my perception has been is
Actually, you might want to try to zoom out a little bit because can you zoom out?
yes. Let me try that out.
Because you don't see the whole playbook. I think it's nice to see the other way around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Maybe now zoom in a little bit. That was good. Cool.
Okay. So now,
and by the way, just for
one more.
from an announcement of view, when I look at this, I actually see simplicity, right? So there's a lot of people that look at this kind of stuff and go, whoa, all these things. So this for me, this kind of mapping and graphing and sequence of events, etc. This is actually a huge simplified approach, because what you have here is a huge amount of knowledge that has now been embedded in this sequence of events, right? And I think it's super critical that it should look like this, and it should have decision trees. It should have stuff, because that's kind of a real world. And then going back to my point, what's interesting is that doing an incident is going to be interesting to see how many times or which steps actually work really well and which steps don't work very well, and which steps you want to do sooner versus the other ones, right? But yeah, go on. But this is reality. I love this, right? Because this is the real world complexity of dealing with some of these things.
Yes. So Dennis, I've been trying to see how do we make a playbook as simple as possible, right? Because when everything goes down, you need something as simple as possible. Now, the ones in red, please note the ones in gray are the preparations. What is my strategy to respond? But the ones in red are clearly the steps for detection, analysis, containment, and remediation, and post-analysis. These are all very tactical level, like exactly probably what the CISO would do and his team would do. But at a very high level, at a holistic level, we need the entire company to respond to it, right? It is, for example, so what is my key strategy overall? How do I create a war room? How do I create the governance structure? What is my communication flow? What are my call trees? Then exactly what does the CISO do, right? For example, in this case, right? So what are the roles of the CISO's team, right? What does he do? What does the CIO do? What does his team do? What does the CEO's team do? The operations team, the CFO, information, IT teams, the communication. So the advantage here is the moment each of the teams are defined with their own tasks, well-defined. Again, please note that they'll drill down to smaller playbooks. For example, I'll also drill down here to a communication playbook. This playbook would again tell exactly if we want to announce, okay, that we want to disclose to the world. This is the way I'll disclose, and this is my decision not to disclose. Now, if you want to disclose, what is the message and when to disclose? Select the mode of disclosure, and finally, prepare for the reactions and deliver the message. Right. So you need playbooks at very top level. Again, at a very granular level, extremely granular. So this entire space would become a lot more interesting when it's simple at the same time as the coverage of all members to respond.
No, love it. Because that's what you want, right? And again, then you want to be brutal, every playbook, to understand what works. So if there was a box in here on the red, which is, check your encrypted drives, right, for stuff remotely. You want to then do the Eliza treatment and going, what the hell is that doing? Get rid of it. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yes.
But that's exactly the flow, right? I think, then now you have a scalable way and to customize it to an organization, right? Because
Exactly.
the more customized this is, because, think about like the idea that we now are making these easier for non-security expert. In fact, going even to that comment, Eliza, you made before, right? Now you don't need security experts to run this playbook, right? Because in a way, the security expertise went into creating the playbook.
Exactly.
Yeah, it needs to be, there's an argument to say it needs to be democratized in that sense, and that this needs to be accessible. You think if you run a hotel or a hair salon and you can't afford security expertise, but you have access to something like this, which might be generic, but at least it tells you who you need to report it to and how you need to legally cover yourself. So yeah, that's really valuable. Thank you, Venkat.
No, and I think we talked about this on the risk conversation before, right? Which is, how do you capture the risk information? Because actually, what you have in there, it is, you're doing risk analysis, right? So if you think about it, right, either explicit or implicitly, you made a huge amount of risk-based decisions to create that playbook. What do you look first? What do you protect first, right? How do you report? How do you deal with this? All of those are risk-based decisions, right? And in fact, if you go back to the risk universe, right, this connects really nicely because, again, this connects to those actions. This connects to the things you do and how you handle, So, I really like it. Right? I think it's a great way to visualize it. And I think, Venkat, one thing I would recommend to you is I think you guys need to basically start sponsoring and publishing very simple playbooks, right?
Yes.
To grow the industry. So I think you were one of those spaces where you now need the industry to grow.
Yes.
You got the end goal. The question is how to get the teams to operate in certain ways, right? So there's a great conversation to be had. Even going to Eliza's point of industry specific things, like a playbook for an incident response in the nuclear plant is of a particular type of incident. It's very different from an airline. It's very different from an HR company. It's very different from financial company. It's very different from other things, right? Some companies will say, as long as you're not losing a lot of money, that's the priority. And other companies will go, we care about data. Others companies, we care about data leakage. Other companies care about don't show up on a Daily Mail, right? As a headline. Other cares about governance. Others actually care about the customers, right? It's like, who would say, right? But it's important, and the playbook should reflect that, right? The playbook, and it's also something you can get approved by senior management, right? Going back to that idea of doing this before, and Liam had a good point of, do you got these business impact assessments? Guess what? Visualizing playbooks and defining playbooks like this is a great way to think in advance. What would you do?
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, I only spoke then because it went quiet and it felt awkward. Well, no, I agree. It at least gets you thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it also allows the experts to scale, right? Because basically, we know there's only a limited amount of experts. We know there's only a limited amount of people who actually have a bit of expertise, and that's how it should be, right? Because not everybody should know about this. The question is how we share that knowledge. In fact, how do we scale that knowledge? Look, the reason I try to always get my team to write all the questions and all the activities, etc., because what I'm really doing is, are they going the right direction, right? So I can look at that playbook and going, cool, like, there's nothing else for me to add because they're going to ask the questions that I'll be asking, or, I'll learn something too. But you start to see the direction of travel, or you can see a playbook and you're going, guys, you're going in a completely wrong direction. Like you're not even reading well. What the hell is going on? So in a way, again, playbooks allows you to almost delegate, but also make sure that the teams are much more aligned, and you can add a lot of value to it, especially if you keep improving them.
Yeah, I think it kind of overlaps with a brain cell, with like change approval boards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So how I'm sure everyone here has been on a change approval board at some point, and there'll be a load of people sat in a room that a lot of the time have got nothing to do with a particular project that is happening, and they make a decision on whether or not this project can go ahead or if this big change can go ahead, and they don't really understand the impact of it, even though they might work in cybersecurity or work in IT or whatever. So it's kind of like these kinds of things are really good in a sort of formal process like what Venkat just explained, where you can have people that are the ones that have to attend this meeting. They might not fully understand what has happened, but they can go, or what might happen, what the impact might be, but they can go and go, right, okay, what's involved? And they're like, right, the website's involved. Okay, is it in time of change freeze? No. Okay, is it going to impact the payment system? No. So they can make a logical decision that, okay, that change can go ahead. Whereas you might get other people, there might be a rotation, it might be holidays or whatever, other people can come in and follow that same process and understand how that change got signed off. But actually what tends to happen is people don't understand it, so they'll go okay, because they don't want to look stupid.
Or they say no, right? Or they go, don't do it because I'm not comfortable doing it, right?
Which I mean, I appreciate, to be honest.
That's as damaging, right? Like there's a really great thinking of here to say, if 1 to 10 is the risk appetite of the business and the business is at 7, if we let the business operate at 8, 9, or 10, we're basically being irresponsible because we shouldn't let the business operate at that level. But if we force the business to operate at 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2 level of risk, then we are damaging the business because we are slowing it down. Right. So that's a good example. But that's a cost that we sometimes have that needs to be measurable. Like you said, if we create a system where people then don't approve things because they're worried or they worry about the side effects, they don't have a clear rules of engagement of what to approve or what not to approve, we are slowing the business down. Right.
Yeah, because you could literally have, like a lead developer that's the one that could really understand the impact, or a lead DevOps person that could really understand the impact, and the people around them kind of learn from that person. So they can't be in every single change approval meeting or whatever. And this is a common sense way to just get people on the same page. Junior people can learn from it as well. Worst case scenario, they get it wrong, and like you were saying earlier, if a minor error, I'm not saying that I'm just in my hypothetical situation, but if a minor error results in the business closing, then what the fuck were you thinking, allowing everyone to have domain admin anyway?
But I don't know my experience, but I would say just about, unless there's really a malicious entity, some of the biggest damage I've seen to the business have been then self-inflicting. In fact, I actually think in most business, the business itself is the biggest attacker, right? Because if you look at the amount of damage that gets caused, right, and most of it is done by the right hand doesn't understand what the left hand is doing. A lot of people with very good intentions, but they don't understand the side effects of what they do. And then you have this cascading error, and then suddenly the website is down, suddenly things are exposed, and then even sometimes a compromise for a criminal is just a side effect of a lot of other bad decisions that were made along the way without understanding the real business context. Oh, let's take this app live. Yeah, but that app was developed in a very different context than our main website or our main production system. But, it looks good. There's the trick. So let's freaking take it live. And then 6 months down the line, a year down the line, it gets owned spectacularly, right? Because the risk assessment was never done properly. Those decisions were made without proper context, without that playbook that would tell you, like even a simple question of, do you have a playbook for an instance response for that application? That's such a great question. It's like, do you know what we do if something goes wrong with that app, right? Most teams don't, right?
No. But yeah, I mean, for your core business systems, you absolutely should.
Absolutely, right? And that's, again, I think the playbooks, they raise the bar, right? They should raise the bar, as long as, and I think, Venkat, you really nailed it when you said we have to evolve it. It cannot be solidified, because there's also lots of bad playbooks out there.
Yeah.
I think Liam's comment's really good, actually, that when people panic, they don't read anything anyway. So having like a long incident response plan that's like a 70-page booklet is not going to help.
Yeah, but that's a bad playbook, right? Like I love the book.
Exactly, like that's his point there, that what Venkat was showing is actually a brilliant sort of alternative.
It has to be the second nature. I mean, it has to be the muscle memory, right? The muscle memory has to be built during an incident. Definitely, it's tough to look at a playbook. You need to You
No,
just
but
need to reflect your thoughts.
I would
ABC.
argue that no, the playbook has to be designed to take in context what context you're working on,
Yes.
right? So you know, and this actually the Cynefin framework is really good at this one. Like he talks about the context and the people, etc. If you guys looked into it, it's amazing. David Snowden. But I go back. There's a great book called Checklist. I don't know if you guys know about that book.
Yes.
And the big lesson on the book is to say you don't create checklists for everything you need to do, right? You create checklists for the things that you probably get it wrong, or for the things that you want to think about, right? So you have a checklist whether you look left or right before you cross the runway, right? You think that's freaking obvious, but that triggers a set of behaviors. They don't have a checklist to turn on the plane, right? Because if you don't turn the freaking plane on, the plane doesn't go. So it's obvious that the pilot will do that, right? So I like the idea of again, playbooks as checklists, right? And what should be in there is not the things that everybody's going to do sometimes, but it's also the things that we want to make sure they do, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's things that they're always going to, and that's the thing about the playbooks. Like you have to make sure that they don't become a checklist of this big, right? So you have to keep refactoring. That's why I like the states, because you go, look, we're always going to do those 5 steps. So you don't have to document. That can almost be a checklist inside the first one. I know the next things I need to do. But you know, take into account that when people especially are panicking, their focus is very different, then your playbooks have to take that into account. And if your playbooks don't take that into account, then it's a shit playbook, right? Like if you have a playbook for an incident and people don't use the playbook, guess what? It's not the people's problem, it's the playbook's problem. It's like, let's be clear, right? The playbook has to take into account the context of the individual and where they are and what's going on around you, right?
I like to think of them as like, I don't think there's any women on this call. I don't know. Hopefully there is. But when you're like a little girl and you're not quite a teenager yet, you'll get like a magazine that's, well, you did in the 90s. You'd have like a magazine that's like, who's your Backstreet Boy? And you'd be like, do you like Burger King? And you'd be like, yes, I love Burger King. And you'd be like, Nick Carter loves Burger King too. And it's like, do you have ketchup? And you'd be like, yes. And they'd be like, Nick Carter loves ketchup too. And then you follow it along and it's like, Nick Carter's your Backstreet Boy. And you'd be like, yes. Like that's I mean, he's gross now. He's not aging very well. But the point is having something to follow like that is literally like, is PCI affected? You know, is anything front facing affected? Those kind of things. I don't know. Go to this next step. That kind of thing opens up another page. Well, that's kind of nice. However, I will say, I've seen a company that had great playbooks, absolutely fantastic. And then they got hit by ransomware and those playbooks were all digitalized. So they didn't actually have access to them in the crux of the incident, which was something that they'd not thought of. So whenever we provide playbooks, we always give them on paper copies as well.
Yeah.
They laugh at us and they're like, oh my God, this is so old school. And we're like, well, we've seen what happens and you don't.
No, that's true. I once, you know, read this thing of a major corporation that the main reason the thing lasted for 4 hours versus 10 minutes was because the thing affected, in that case, Atlassian, right? Where all the apps that were hosted. So they didn't have access to it. But that's a good example of a threat model, right? Like you almost need to go, okay, you know, what are the backups? Like what are the systems in place? Like you should have a playbook for that, right? Like what is, you know, where is this information? And like, yeah, if you don't have this, where are you going to do? But I think the good news is if you have a team that's already thinking in terms of playbooks, it's easier for them to now operationalize that versus a team that never have it, right? But you're right, you know, the more you go into playbooks, the more that becomes a single point of failure, the more you need to think it properly, right? The more you need to, guys, just to finish on this one, maybe okay, let's go last thoughts because we are going around. I really looking forward to start see playbooks worked like DevOps world. Like I like playbooks on Git. I like playbooks that you can actually, you know, operationalize at that level that are graph based, but you know, also have like this offline copy version, right? Which is, for example, if your data was all on Git, I could have all my playbooks running from my laptop, right? Yes, you have the central version. Yes, there's coordination there, but having version control for the playbooks, having Markdown being used for the content, having graph-based stuff on it, I think is also super powerful, and also start to introduce change control itself in the playbooks. So that's my last thought. Let's get change control into the playbooks. Venkat, what's your last thought on
Yeah.
this topic.
Yes, perfect. So one of the last thoughts which I always want to ensure is the entire playbooks have to be linked to the MITRE attack metrics, right? It's very important that when organizations start building playbooks, they identify at least, say, for example, I need to cover at least have a baseline 100 playbooks, right, which covers most of the possible ways an attacker come in. So the moment you have your baseline playbooks, then you have your top level playbooks. I feel the entire combination of this ecosystem where I'm able to handle smaller events with playbooks, like for example, too many login attempts or someone tries to do a recon. At the same time, having the strategy level playbooks, this combination would give a better cyber resilient position.
Yeah. Go on, Eliza, give us another tangent.
Sorry, I felt like I should apologize. That's why I put it in there, because I was like, oh, Nick Carter. Oh, I think my final word would be just to make sure we have offline copies, I guess. And you know, it's like anything that's super important. For example, I've seen a number of incidents where there's been a theme, and the theme has been hosted in the environment that has been compromised, so they have no access to the theme. So there's just all kinds of reasons to have a playbook, and you can go through like a whole strategy to like mature your environment and make sure you've got your cyber defenses. But really, not having a playbook to start off with, even a very high level strategic one, is going to mean that you're going to waste money and you're going to misdirect your efforts when it comes to maturing yourself. So I think starting off with a strategic, if you go in somewhere, you're new on the job, you're senior or not, and you want to really have an impact, if they don't have playbooks, work on some playbooks and you will be the person they can never get rid of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as a professional, we should say that the more playbooks you create, the more you can think in playbooks, the more valuable you become in our industry.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everybody. This was a lot of lovely sessions.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me. Let's do more of this. Again, I think what's cool about it is let's try to come up with maybe more specific topics, and then we can get again people that can really join in on those topics, right? It's really cool. But thanks again. This was another great session.
Thank you.